if we can't have fish and we aren't able to water our crops, how are we going to get food? Because everything's drying up, and there's going to be a point in time when nothing is accessible, and then what do we eat? Then at that point we decide, okay, maybe let's just eat grass.
Yeah, I think that the farmers in the lower basin are like very seriously confronting this possibility because, again, if Lake Powell gets low enough, there's a very real possibility that the structural engineering will not allow them to actually receive their full allocation of water. If any amount of water, if it gets low enough, they might literally not be able to access any of the water in Lake Powell. Colorado River would run dry. That's like a nuclear option. It would.
From the Sarah Smiles Network, I'm Sarah Smiles, and this is the Consider the Source podcast, a show about women who've built ideas, movements, and careers by questioning the status quo and challenging norms in the hopes of inspiring other women. On today's episode, I am joined by Teal, who is a water rights activist in a very dry place. Teal is an amazing wealth of knowledge about water and water rights and why we should be concerned and what the water crisis is. And in this episode, you'll really hear and understand the concepts that'll get you excited about water, which is something that you wouldn't typically find yourself getting so excited about. But water is important. Water is a vital element of life. It is what we need to survive. And so it's about time we start caring about it.
Describe myself as a girl who's really obsessed with water in a really dry place. But my name is Teal, and I live in a place called Durango, Colorado. There's a little river that runs through our town, and I've always kind of been a river-oriented person. And I currently run a platform that's dedicated to raising awareness for issues related to water scarcity and water equity issues in the Colorado River Basin and in the Western United States and beyond. And then I also work in social media consulting related to public lands. And then in my free time, I just recently took over my county's Democratic Party as chair.
Wow. Well, congrats. That's awesome.
I end up going up there a lot.
Yeah? For anything in particular?
Oh, it's just like most of the big orgs have offices up there, and I'll do speaking engagements. I just went up there for the American Public Gardens Association conference, which was really cool.
So do you do speaking engagements or do you just attend?
I do speaking engagements. I was one of their 4 keynote speakers. They had one person for each element, so I was representing water.
Wow, that's really impressive. How did you get into doing that?
Honestly, I just started my platform and then people started offering me, and I was like, well, that sounds cool. I did do speech and debate in high school, so I'm not like super afraid of public speaking.
Yeah.
So it's been fun though, and I get to travel and like go cool places for speaking to people in a room that care about the same things that I care about.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I think that what you're talking about is so important and so interesting for a variety of reasons. I think number one, like the part that intrigues me the most when you talk about water scarcity, like to my brain, I'm like, okay, what water scarcity? Every time I turn on my tap, there's water in it. And so I feel like that is the general consensus of what most of America thinks. And I'm speaking on behalf of a group of people that probably might have a differing idea, but I feel like that is the same sentiment towards electricity as well, that it's just an abundant resource that we are going to be able to flip our light switch on and have the lights come on anytime that we want. So how would you describe what water scarcity actually is and why people should care about it?
Great question. I think number one, a lot of Americans don't even know where their water comes from. Like, you're right, they turn on the tap and it comes out of the sink, and so that's probably their number one impression. But there is a river or a lake or something that is the source of your water, and I always encourage people to like familiarize themselves with that because you should know that. But basically, in the Western United States, we have a system of water management that is not very flexible or has not been updated in quite a while. So it sets us up to be in a position where we expect more water than there actually is, especially in the Colorado River Basin. So in the Colorado River Basin, there's a really old document from 1922 that determines how much water each state in the Colorado River Basin receives. And unfortunately, the estimate for that was significantly higher than the actual and average annual flow within the basin. So like baked into the way we manage water in the Colorado River Basin is an inherent deficit. But also we're finding that as it's getting hotter and drier in this region, we're getting less and less flows, or they're sporadic. So sometimes we'll get a lot of flows, but then it'll be followed up by multiple years of very low flows. And that creates a situation where water managers are not necessarily like turning off the taps for cities, quite yet. But they have talked about that in negotiating rooms in the last couple of years because that is a very real possibility that some of the cities in the basin are facing.
Wow, which is terrifying to think about because at this point in time, like you can just go to any faucet virtually anywhere and turn on water anywhere. And the other part of that that's so interesting to me is because you'll hear about how climate change has affected water levels, but normally you only hear about how climate change has affected water levels and the fact that the ice caps are melting and it's raising the water levels. And to me, that would almost seem like there's a surplus. And so obviously with areas getting droughts and not being able to have rainfall in that area, it's going to be a deficit to the amount of water that's in the area. So how does all of that play into each other in terms of there's a surplus in Alaska with the amount of glacier melt that they're seeing, but there's a deficit in Colorado? Like, how do those two really equal out, or do they equal out?
Absolutely. It's interesting because I think a lot of people are confused by this, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
folks who are climate scientists do consider the climate crisis to be a water crisis. And it's not
Mm.
necessarily about the quantity of water available, although as the atmosphere gets warmer, it's actually able to hold more moisture. So more water that is available on Earth can actually be held in the atmosphere. And unfortunately, that means we can't really access it. And it can also create like intense and sporadic precipitation events. And so that's essentially
Mm-hmm.
what we're seeing is the distribution of water across the world is not necessarily following the same weather patterns that we have relied on consistently for quite some time. And then I think we're also dealing with, we have laws that are not necessarily in line with even the original environmental reality, and now that environmental reality is shifting, and it doesn't really have a lot
Mm-hmm.
of ability to adapt to that. And so I think that question is honestly relevant to even like the people who are making the laws and regulations related to water. I don't think they're fully understanding that connection either.
Yeah, yeah. Which then brings me to my next question of what is the hierarchy of water? Because when I'm at my hydro facility and we're talking about selling the land or selling the water rights for the water that flows through our hydroelectric facility, what does that mean? Who are we selling it to? Like we're still generating the energy. How does that hierarchy work and who really reports to who? Who gets to make the legislature based on that? Is it the people at the top or is it the people that are actually dealing with the water?
Well, here in the state of Colorado, the way we manage water is actually written into our state constitution. So it is at the very, very top. And we have water courts that then adjudicates or a
Wow.
separate court system that specifically deal with water rights. And those water rights are issued on a seniority basis. It's like called first in time, first in right. So basically like somebody who had a farmstead back in like the 1870s who like dug a ditch and diverted water for their farm has a priority dating to that date they dug that ditch. And that means that somebody who dug a ditch maybe in 1920 would have a more junior water
Mm-hmm.
right to that person who has an older ditch. And if that stream that both those ditches were coming off of only had enough water to deliver to one of those users, the one who has the older ditch will end
Mm-hmm.
up getting all of their water, and the one who has the newer ditch will get no water. And that's basically how the system works.
What?
The senior water rights holder is entitled to all of their water before any junior water rights holders get theirs. Usually there's some like good old boys dealing on the ditches and the streams so that everybody gets water, but legally, from a bird's eye view, that's kind of the way it works. The enforcement mechanisms for this law, for those laws, is like honestly really complicated. This is something that I've been trying to unravel since I was working at my on my undergraduate degree, which I do have. I graduated in May of 2020, but basically when you look at any water resource, there's going to be like a bunch of tiers of governance regarding that water resource. So I can't say in the specific situation for your hydro plant, but like say there was a ditch in my area on the Animas River, that ditch will have a company,
Mm-hmm.
which is like all of these farms took their senior water rights and put them together in like common tenancy to be able to divert from the river together. And they make like a company with a board, and that board will have somebody whose job is called ditch rider, and they will walk around the ditches like lowering and raising head gates to ensure that each user is getting the
Mm-hmm.
correct amount of water. So that's like the most basic level. And then above that you have reservoir managers who decide like when water is being released into those streams that the ditch riders then put into their ditches to then give to each of their water rights holders. And then when it comes to municipalities, typically they'll have a water right in like a lake or a reservoir, and they'll have like a direct extraction point from that lake or reservoir to their water treatment facilities.
Okay. So it's a very convoluted, and the way that you described it was very methodical of how there is a hierarchy to it. But if you go back to like, okay, if someone's ditch is older, then they just automatically get rights, like that seems archaic. And
It is archaic.
there has to be a better way of going about it.
It is not only archaic,
So
there's like another
in
level to this where if you have a senior water right and it's a pretty big one and you're like, well, actually I upgraded my irrigation efficiency and I only need to use half of it, then if you don't use your full water right multiple years in a row, then the state can be like, actually, we're just going to revoke the portion of the water right you're not using. And that water right is tied to your property value. So if you have like $1 million home because half of your property value is in that water right, you have like an incentive to continue using as much water as humanly possible to maintain that value for your property. It's like, it's the most perverse incentive system humanly possible.
Wow. Because wouldn't you think that, like, at least with solar energy, this is how it typically works, is if you put a solar panel on your home and you're generating energy and you make enough energy to power your own home and you have reserves, you can sell it back to your energy company and then make money back on that. That's only going to increase the value of your home because you're able to then generate power and return it back. You would think that there would be some sort of incentive in the way that water would do the same thing, especially if you're running a hydroelectric facility or if you're running a well system. Like, that seems so backwards and weird.
In Colorado, there is a program where irrigators who have senior water rights or just water rights in general, they can be concerned that a reservoir will get so low, especially later in the irrigating season, that there's no water for anybody. Because if the stream runs dry, the stream runs dry. It doesn't matter if you're a senior rights holder or a junior rights holder, there's just no water there. So you can do these contracts where you like agree to not use your water to 1 to 2 out of every 5 years or like 3 out of every 10 years to store in the reservoir to ensure that there will be flows during the hottest part of the season. And that's kind of like the most creative legislation that we've gotten so far. But myself and also a professor from, I want to say, Arizona State University, but I can't remember. It's in Arizona University, I'd have to remember. But his name is Robert Glennon, and he's written a lot about the idea of creating these mechanisms that you're talking about, where like a city could go to a farmer and be like, hey, let's pay for your irrigation upgrades, and then like I just buy what's left over your water right.
Yeah.
Or something like that, where they're not punished, but instead incentivized to use less water. But as it stands right now, like I said, it's enshrined in our state constitution, so it'll take the state legislature actually passing something to be able to do that.
Got it. Okay. So going back to what you initially had said about you running for a position, I didn't realize how, I'm going to say, politically charged water is, because it seems like just a natural resource source that's occurring and it should not be tied to any like policy. Tell me more about that and tell me how water actually is really tied into government policy and government change and how all of that then affects the water that we receive.
Absolutely. Well, to be honest, I got involved with my local political party because my representative at the time was Lauren Boebert, and Lauren Boebert was a bit of an embarrassment to our district, in my opinion. And she also made several ads where she specifically was talking about water as if she was some kind of like water champion, because in my region, water rights are so hotly contested and such an important issue that any political campaign, it's going to be one of the top 3 issues. So it'll be like education, housing, and then water. And those are the 3 issues. Wow. So they'll make ads specific to water rights and like preserving your senior water rights, preserving our agricultural way of living, that kind of stuff. And she made like several ads that way, and it just really frustrated me. And I was like, well, obviously this is like a clearly this is a political issue if it's a main campaign issue for most political campaigns in my area. But also, like right now, there are a lot of impacts happening from the current administration on the Colorado River. There's currently just an acting director or commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation, which is a federal agency that manages the Colorado River Basin, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But currently, all of the states in the Colorado River Basin are negotiating new rules for managing the reservoirs. It's a really critical negotiation and it is not going very well. They keep ending the negotiation process because they're yelling at each other. At one point in time, California threatened to cut off Arizona, or not Arizona, Phoenix and Denver from their water supply before they would cut off their own farmers. And so we really do need leadership. The California representative, his name's JB Hamby, he said something like there is a federal shaped hole in the negotiations process. So there's other decisions too, like the Trump administration recently decided to use tariffs as a way to leverage negotiations for water deliveries in both the Colorado River Basin and the Rio Grande River Basin. So there is absolutely a direct tie to what's happening politically to what's happening with all of our natural resources, but especially water.
Wow. Okay, and so while these people are saying we're gonna cut off access to your water, what does that look like? Like for the city of Denver and for the city of Phoenix, like what does that mean? And why is that not something that we are typically hearing? Like, I live in Denver. Why is this not something that I'm hearing about? Why is this not on the forefront of what people are talking about? Because Lord knows I don't want to take my take my water from the Platte because that is dirty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not really being taken seriously because it's kind of a nuclear option. So in the Colorado River Compact, which is the document that I was talking about earlier that was signed in 1922, it basically enshrined California as having like the eldest and most powerful water rights because people had been diverting a lot of water and very early on in the Colorado River Basin in very southern California, like the Imperial Valley. And so as a result, California has some of the largest, actually has the largest and strongest water rights in the entire Colorado River Basin. The lower basin in general, which is California, Arizona, and Nevada, is entitled to 7.5 million acre feet of water every year, no matter what. Like it's averaged as 75 million acre feet every decade. So some years you can have a little less, but you have to make up for it in another year, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But the reality is there's like a hard and fast number that the lower basin is entitled to. And there are absolutely years where like we just don't have enough flows to be able to do that. And so there's this thing called a compact call, which is where the lower basin, California, would be like, hey, we don't think there's going to be a full 7.5 million acre feet for the lower basin. So we are asking the upper basin to forego their own uses until we get our full allocation. So basically they're saying like, you guys all need to put your taps on hold until we get all 7.5 million acre feet that we're owed. But like literally there is no infrastructure to carry out this legal procedure. California threatens it sometimes in negotiations, but Colorado, for example, kind of laughs at it because that would literally on a like minutia basis, IRL would mean these ditch riders that I was talking about earlier that like lower and raise head gates would have to go and close all the head gates to all of their clients. And like, they're not going to do that.
Yeah, I
Maybe the
don't foresee
federal
that
reservoir,
happening.
yeah, like maybe the federal reservoir managers might be like, we're not going to release water, so the streams might dry up a little bit. But like, there are a lot of, in Colorado, we're so close to the headwaters that like a lot of places they're not below a federally managed reservoir, meaning what are you going to do? Like, come close my headgates, California? So this is like kind of a big contention within the
Right.
basin. This question of how that would happen is like a great question and nobody really knows.
Wow. And that to me is wild because all of a sudden California could show up on our doorstep and be like, hey, we're here to close all of your head gates. Sorry about your water issue. And we can't do anything about it because they have the seniority right. Wow, 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 wow. That's terrifying. So
Yes.
in an event that would happen, what do we do? Are we just in a drought? Like, what do you even call that? Is that a drought? What is that?
I would call it a man-made crisis of many years in the making
Yeah.
because we've known about this issue for a very long time, but nobody wants to make the necessary cuts to water use to stabilize the amount that we're using because we have this like consistent budget deficit that I was talking about earlier. What would happen, in my opinion, and this is like like pure speculation and conjecture, nobody truly knows. I do think
Okay.
the upper basin and lower basin would take it to the Supreme Court. I think that it would end up going all the way to the Supreme Court, and I think it would be really difficult. It's not necessarily like a conservative versus liberal issue. I don't think it would really divide on those lines.
Right.
And the problem is to make changes to the compact itself, we have to pass something through Congress. And we all know how difficult that is right now.
Great. So in 30 years, we'll have it all panned out.
And
Oh
the
my
problem is
gosh.
like the problems we're looking at in the basin related to low water aren't just like people's taps running out. It's like Lake Powell was built in such a way that when it gets low enough, you can't generate power from it anymore. And you actually can't release water through the outworks that go through the hydropower zone. So there's like these side outworks called the river outlet works. But when they've done flows through them, they've had events that they call cavitation, which is where like
Hmm.
little air bubbles pop. I'm sure you're familiar with this with your job, but little air bubbles like pop and then there's damage done to the tunnels.
Hmm.
And so they don't say that that's like a reliable way for water to leave Lake Powell if it gets below the hydropower intake. But there's 25
Hmm.
million people that rely on the Colorado River below Lake Powell. So that's like kind of a big problem. We can't really let it get below the hydropower intake, not to mention that the entire Western electrical grid does rely on hydropower from Lake Powell. It's also one of the only nuclear black start places. Like, if the nuclear sites on the West Coast shut down, they can be restarted by releasing water and generating power from Lake Powell. So basically,
Hmm.
it's a really critical piece of infrastructure beyond just like the literal delivery of water. And it is going to reach that within the next 5 years unless we do something drastic. This is not a like 15,
Wow.
20, 30-year problem. This is a like within the
And
next
now.
decade, we are going to have to deal with this.
Yeah. And so you're talking about the flow, and people are obviously like the flow, it helps with, not helps with, but aids in the demand of water, or water is relative to how much flow is coming through. And so if we're demanding more water, say we're taking 45-hour-long minute showers, and if we cut back on that, is that going to do anything, or is that just like, oh, well, that you're just going to take a shorter shower?
I really wish that this was an individual problem that we could be solved by like individual actions. But the way that our
Mm-hmm.
water rights are set up, the vast majority of our water goes to agriculture. So only about like 10 to 20% goes to municipalities and industries, depending on who you ask
Mm.
and which state you're looking at, and which is still a good amount. But the feds have basically said that we need to cut the use in the basin by 25%. So like we could cut all municipal use, all industrial use, and we'd still have a budget deficit within the basin. There's literally no way for us to solve this problem without getting ag on board. And
Yeah.
obviously, America loves its farmers. I love food. I love eating. I know no farms, no food. So a lot of times when I talk about this, people get a little bit bristly about the concept of taking water away from farmers. But I think it's really important to know that like at least a third of all of the water in the Colorado River Basin is being used to grow alfalfa and other feed for cattle, and a lot of
Mm.
that is being exported. The United States is like one of the
Yeah.
only developed countries that allows the export of alfalfa, and we make up about 60% of the global market, which is crazy. So, like in California, that place Imperial Valley that has those really big senior water rights, they have more water than like the state of Wyoming, or like they have more
Wow.
water than the entire state of Nevada, which Nevada doesn't have a huge allocation, but like the point being that the allocation to those farmers is huge. It's like over 1 million acre feet per year.
Mm-hmm.
And they mostly grow alfalfa down there. There's a great
Mm-hmm.
ProPublica piece where they like analyzed all of the satellite data for evapotranspiration to decide like what crops they were growing and how much water it was using. And it's a lot. It's almost all going to alfalfa. And in 2020, which is the latest data that I have, in 2020, 40% of all of the alfalfa grown in California was exported just to China. So like there's
Wow.
this clear low-hanging fruit in my mind that we need to solve, but nobody is really like stepping into that zone.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because when I was in college, I took a sustainable engineering course, and instead of seeing like how much wattage you were using, took into account what your water footprint was. And it was like, how long of a shower do you take? How do you carpool to school slash work? Do you, and then it started talking about what you eat. And I was like, why would what I eat matter like that much? I mean, and then it was saying whether you're vegetarian or whether you're pescatarian or whether you eat all of the above. And I was like, okay, I eat beef probably, or I eat meat probably like 3, 4 times a week. And then it was like my water footprint was like 10 times
Mhm.
the amount of my friend that ate meat once a week. And I was like, what? How is that happening? And then, like what you're saying, you need alfalfa to feed the cows. You need land for them to graze off of. You need water to then also supply for the crops and the plants that these farmers are also raising. And it's a huge footprint. And you have to think like you can't rely on the natural patterns of water coming from rain. because as humans, we expect to go to the grocery store and have all of our food readily available. We can't be without certain supplies because there was a drought in Colorado, or there was a drought in Wyoming, and there's no beef right now, or a farmer can't be without that income. And so it really just puts a difficult everyone in a difficult position. And I think you're 100% right of it's not going to be an issue that's based on Democrats versus Republicans. Like, this is an everybody issue. If you want to eat, get on board because it starts with water.
Absolutely. And like there's a place in the Colorado River Basin called Yuma, Arizona, and it's referred to as the winter vegetable bowl of America. So like 90% of all winter lettuce comes from Yuma, Arizona. So if you like eating leafy greens in the winter, you should probably care about the Colorado River Basin because that is where they're getting their water from. And Arizona is a place that is absolutely going to have to make water cuts at some point in time. And I would much rather see them choose to preserve like produce growing than like alfalfa and cotton growing in the desert.
Yeah. And the other wild part about water distribution and who uses the most amount of water, I believe it was number one, agriculture, number two, golf courses. Did I make that up or is that true?
You're not wrong.
Golf courses are up there.
It's not only golf, it's grass in general. So that goes with municipal use. Like municipal use is probably like around, without industrial, it's kind of hard to separate the two of them, but it's probably around like 10 to 15% of all water use in the basin, maybe 11, somewhere around there. And about half of all municipal use goes towards grass, which is crazy. And golf courses are
really
absolutely
weird.
Included in that.
Which to me, I'm just like, okay, why do everyone has to mow their lawn? I don't know anyone who's like, I really love mowing my lawn. So maybe let's just dig up the lawns and just put some rocks in there or something. That's what the people in Las Vegas do. I think that we could get that as a cultural norm, or just allow for like, if your grass is going to die, it's going to die. And that's the natural course of your grass's life. You either get to pick to go to the grocery store and have food, or you get to pick to have a green lawn. The choice is yours, but you only get one or the other.
I love that you brought up Las Vegas because they're like such a great example. They paid homeowners to get rid of lawns, but they had to put like a conservation easement on their property. So like even if somebody buys it, they're not allowed to put a lawn back in, which is really cool. They also, Nevada passed some legislature that banned non-functional turf grass, which is like the grass that you see in like medians or like on the side of a hill. Just places where like people wouldn't actually recreate or enjoy the grass. It's just grass for no reason because it looks nice. And then Vegas also recycles almost all of the water that is used inside, which is super cool.
Interesting. So what does it mean for them to recycle the water versus like cities that don't recycle water?
They process all of their water and then they put it back into the Las Vegas wash, which then goes into Lake Mead. So it gets like a little bit more diluted. They obviously process it for, to all of the standards, but also it goes back into Lake Mead, which is their intake as well. So like they have kind of a closed loop there, and they invested a lot in that to be able to do that. The Nevada and the Southern Nevada Water Authority tend to be like trailblazers and leaders in the water conservation world. They have the smallest allocation in the Colorado River Basin. It's only about 275,000 acre feet per year, which compared to California's 4 million acre feet per year is like not a lot of water. But what they did is they were like, they saw the writing on the wall and they were like, we are going to invest in a culture of water conservation like you were talking about. And like their whole city, it's crazy because it's like, think of like city of excess, but their whole city has like a very strong water conservation ethic. They even have like, they don't like to call them water cops. They're called water waste investigators, but they have people who drive around in like little cars with lights and they can give you like pretty hefty tickets for watering when you're not supposed to or letting it run on the concrete. Yeah, like it's a whole culture in their city, and I think that's what we have to adopt like basin wide / like in general. If you live in an arid place, you should have a culture of like, this is a valuable and precious resource and know where it comes from.
Yeah. No, and that's a really good point. And the other thing that when I think of you saying that the government actually paid for people to remove their lawns and they've put it into like writing of, hey, you actually can't ever put a lawn in here. Like, sorry about it. Do you think that that's something that could ever happen in Colorado? I feel like people are so into biodiversity and maintaining what currently exists. Do you think that's ever something that would get on, or that Coloradans would get on board with?
It's fascinating because Colorado, our representatives are very like water conservation forward. They talk about it
Mm-hmm.
a lot. However, I've sat with my state rep, not my current state rep, but my previous state rep who is now no longer, and I mean in-state rep.
Okay.
And she basically explained to me that there's like a really strong HOA, apartment owner, realtor association lobby that is very opposed to like any kinds of restrictions on growing green grass lawns and or requiring HOAs to not require a green lawn because like that's a thing. Places will like that you move in will be like you get fined if your lawn isn't green.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is something that I think that the state legislatures have been like batting around and talking about. And similarly to the like use it or lose it thing, I think that those contracts where the irrigators are allowed to store their water in the reservoir is like the legislature is like slowly but surely trying to move in that direction. But it's
Mm-hmm.
important to understand like the reason water rights are enshrined in the state constitution is like part of the reason Colorado became a state was to enshrine the way we were using our water rights. It's like it's a part of our identity. So any like
Mm-hmm.
changes to the way we manage water, the way we use water is definitely seen as like an affront to the identity that like many Coloradans have.
Right. And the more that I think about it, of America and Colorado specifically, including it in our Constitution, is, are other countries facing this issue? Are other countries seeing issues in what they're going to do with their water, if their water supply is in a crisis situation, or is this something that's just exclusive to the United States and we need to get our shit together?
Oh no, this is definitely a problem in a lot of other places. Close to home, Mexico has a lot of issues with water, and some of that is related to the Colorado River Basin because they are allocated water in the Colorado River Basin. Also, like
Huh.
Chile has had a lot of issues related to water. They have like a fully privatized water market, and that led to a lot of corporations buying a lot of the water rights. And then there were like whole communities where their water was just like sucked dry, which is pretty crazy. It contributed to a lot of the protests that happened in Chile. I
Mm-hmm.
want to say 2021, somewhere around
Mm-hmm.
there. And then there's also basically water is a resource that there's always going to be conflict over because you need it to survive, and there has always
Right.
been conflict over water. Water infrastructure resources like dams and stuff like that are typically considered like really high terrorist targets. In the Middle East, in multiple conflicts, they have used flooding dams or taking over dams as ways to like gain control, both from
Wow.
people who are insurgents and like US armed forces. So water has always kind of been a resource that's used in conflict and also creates conflict. Another
Mm-hmm.
example is on the Nile River. Two different countries have built dams and they're kind of competing over on like two tributaries to the Nile, and they're like kind of
Oof.
competing over like who actually is entitled to the water.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's conflict everywhere. It is definitely not just the United States. I will say that the whole world is definitely looking at the Colorado River Basin with bated breath because it's kind of like the first natural resource system that's about to come to a screeching halt because of climate change.
Wow.
And so everybody's kind of looking at it like, well, what's going to happen? Because every individual and actor is incentivized to act rationally for their constituents or their personal gain. But the reality is like we kind of have to all come together and make some sacrifices to stabilize the system. And that's
Mm-hmm.
essentially what the climate change issue is as well. So, is that people are
Yeah.
looking at the Colorado River Basin like, how is that going to turn out? And it's kind of wild because all of the decision making is happening behind closed doors.
Which is terrifying because you would like to think that the general public would like to know what's going on with their water. And the fact that I feel like it's not a well known issue of what's even happening in our own backyard. Like, you hear stuff about Flint, Michigan, and how you turn on the water tap and it just bleeds dirt, basically. Or if you go to a Native American reservation and they don't have great water access either, you hear about that stuff. But the crazy thing to me is that other countries are watching what we're doing, but me, an American, and more importantly, a Colorado like person, a Colorado civilian, doesn't even know what's happening in my own Colorado River. Like, what is happening?
I think in some sense, those people who are the decision makers feel, and also people who have senior water rights, there is a less of the public knows, the less the general public cares, the better, because we get to continue using the system that we already have. And we get to make these decisions
Mm-hmm.
in this vacuum by saying, like, oh, well, they don't understand because this system is complicated, which it is. But in this podcast, I've explained it fairly well. There's obviously more nuance to it than exactly what I've said in this short interview, but I think anybody with two eyeballs can look at this system and be like, wow, this does not make a lot of sense, and we are going to have to change it sometime soon. But that's not really the
Mm-hmm.
conversation that is being had on a basin-wide scale necessarily.
Right. Yeah, so what do you recommend for like normal people like you and me to do? I mean, I guess you're a little bit different because you're running for a government position, but what do you recommend for like me and my neighbors? Like, what do we do? Do we campaign? Do we like, we can't really protest? Like, I'm not going to use my water. Like, what do you do?
I mean, everybody hates this answer, but like eating less beef and dairy products is like the number one thing you can do. I am not out here saying that I am vegan. I am not. Your girl loves hot
Yeah,
dogs, but like I I do try not to eat beef in my home unless I'm eating hot
hmm
dogs.
that's so
Yeah,
valid. So
yeah,
American.
I'm American at heart. I'm a patriot. Gotta have my hot dogs. But yeah, that's like the number one thing you can do. You can choose to not grow a lawn. If you do have a lawn, you can choose to grow like native grasses.
Mm-hmm.
I think also just paying attention to this issue and making it clear that people do care and that like the decisions that are being made now are not going to be swept under the rug, because the reality is the people who are making these decisions are probably not going to be in office anymore once like the real implications of them come out, because like I said
Mm-hmm.
earlier in the podcast, these are a lot of them are appointed positions. So there's like not super high turnover, but these people don't stay for like 15, 20, 30 years usually. So like they're making these decisions and they're going to get to step away, and if they know that we're watching them and we're paying attention, then they might feel incentivized to actually
Mm-hmm.
make smarter long-term decisions rather than politically expedient decisions for the short term for their own careers.
Right. Yeah. And so when you're saying make sure that they know that we're paying attention. So obviously, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on with the big beautiful bill, and I hate calling it that, but it has recently passed. However, the senators did elect to remove the part about the sale of public land. So, obviously, calling your senator and making a bunch of noise about that issue allowed for a direct result to happen. In this event, how do you let your appointed positions know, like, hey, we're watching you. We're looking at what's happening in the water basin. We're looking at what's happening in the Colorado River. It's scary. What's going on? Talk to us about it. Reassure us that everything's going to be okay.
Well, number one, you can contact your in-state reps, so not the ones that are in DC, but the ones that are in your state capital. So for us, it's in Denver, and talk to them. Like I just explained that I had talked to my in-state rep about this because it's something I care about, and
Mm-hmm.
they are the ones who are going to have to pass the legislation eventually that are going to solve this issue. But that's also kind of a unique thing because there's not as much gridlock happening in state legislatures as there is in the national legislature. So you have an opportunity to actually influence that decision making. The other thing is just like staying informed and supporting writers, journalists, different news publications that are actually covering this issue, because not all news publications pay attention until like it's a real big problem, and a lot of times there's a lot of
Right.
lead up or information before that. And then also look up where your water comes from. Figure out what river your water from your tap comes from. And then maybe do a
Mm-hmm.
cleanup day. There's a bunch of citizen science projects that you can do throughout the Colorado River Basin and also throughout the United States, where like you can go do citizen science monitoring at your local river and provide data for people to understand the health of your river. And I know that seems like a really small thing, but like truly, as somebody who has been doing a lot of political organizing and environmental action activism organizing for a while, the local, really small actions are going to fuel you more than calling any office ever is going to. Actually going out, picking up trash and like measuring the turbidity of your local stream is going to make you feel a lot better than sitting on the phone with any kind of capital aid.
Yeah, definitely. And so, what are some resources or journalistic publications that you follow that other people can look to for information? Because I feel like nowadays it's like, okay, what do I trust? Who do I look to for answers about this stuff? Like, are people just hiding stuff from me? What's going on?
Colorado is really unique in that we have an organization called Water Education Colorado, and they have a really awesome
Perfect.
newsletter called Freshwater News that you can sign up for, and they will give you all the updates you need to know about the state of Colorado. I love them. There's
Mm-hmm.
also the Northern NPR station, KUNC, has a reporter named Alex Hager who runs a water desk. He does some of the best coverage in the basin, in my opinion. There's also a reporter with the Colorado Sun named Shannon Mullane. She does really great reporting on the basin. There's another reporter named Elise Schmelzer. I can't pronounce her last name, but I think she works for the Denver Post. She does really good reporting on this issue. There's another reporter named Heather Sackett who works for Aspen Times. She does really great
Hmm.
reporting on this issue. And then, sorry, this is a whole list, but I'm a
No,
nerd,
I
so.
appreciate it.
Last but not least, I would say ProPublica. ProPublica has done some really good deep dives into the Colorado River Basin. Oh, also Vox. Vox has done a really good deep dive into the Colorado River Basin as well. But for that, like, day-to-day drumbeat coverage, those local reporters like Alex,
Hmm.
Shannon, Elise, they're doing a much better job of like covering the small, minute pieces that end up building up
Hmm.
to these bigger decisions. And it's really important to understand that because that's where you intersect with the decision making, not when the decision is already made.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And beyond just affecting people, like with all this water crisis occurring, how does it affect like wildlife and nature and what we expect when we go outside and enjoy hikes or enjoy fishing or things of that nature? What does this water crisis really mean to the animals that live in it and the nature that lives in it?
I'm so glad you asked this question because it is so often forgotten and it is actually a really critical component. There's like quite a few endangered fish species that live in the Colorado River Basin. There's even a fish that can get up to 6 feet long that lives in the Colorado River, which is crazy to me. It's
What?
called the Colorado pike minnow. Part of me wishes
I've
I did
heard of
not
that
have that
actually. Okay,
information
yep.
because now I go into those rivers and I'm like, oh my God, there could be a big fish in here. But anyways, the fish are not doing well. We have an endangered fish recovery system that is
Hmm.
some of the best and strongest environmental protections for any of the rivers in the Colorado River Basin. But the reality is, like a lot of times, there's just not water for the fish. And in
Mm.
Colorado, we didn't create the concept of saving water for fish and keeping it in stream until like the 90s, no, the 70s. And so
Wow.
when we're talking about people who have started getting their water rights in the 1800s, that means it's a really, like, that's a really junior right. So, like,
Yeah.
a microcosm of this, there's a river near me called the Dolores River, and it is
Hmm.
a fully allocated river. It runs dry quite frequently during the dry seasons. There was a huge push to secure water rights for the fish within the river because some of those endangered fish species live there, but they delegated or they designated in-stream flow rights, but those weren't delegated until the 90s. And so
Hmm.
most years when the river's going to run dry anyways, that's too junior. So the senior water rights holders get all of their water, and by the time that happens, there's nothing left over for the fish. And when that happens, the fish die off, and like 80 to 90%
Wow.
fish die off. Like, yeah, it's really sad. So there are a lot of people working on that issue. There is a huge endangered species recovery program, but they're kind of at the mercy of what the flows give them and the legal structure that they're operating under. But when it comes to the
Hmm.
reservoirs, so like Lake Mead, Lake Powell, some of those federally managed reservoirs, they can do
Hmm.
releases to benefit the fish populations, and they do quite frequently. And that's why the Grand Canyon, which is below Lake Powell, tends to have some of the healthiest native fish populations. It's also an uninterrupted section of river. But unfortunately, as another side effect of the water crisis, Lake Powell got super low, and then the water at the bottom got a little bit warmer, and they stock Lake Powell with smallmouth bass because that's like
Hmm.
most anglers love catching bass. It's like super fun or whatever. They usually stay only
Hmm.
in the warm section of the water. They don't usually swim all the way down to where it's cool. But it got so low and the water got warm enough that some of the smallmouth bass actually got through into the Grand Canyon for the first time. And they think they
Wow.
might be spawning down there, which would be quite detrimental to the endangered fish species. I just said that's like the last haven for the endangered fish species. And they outcompete the local fish species like no other. Like they'll eat the local fish species, they'll eat their food sources, they'll trap them into little puddles, and they'll like mess up their breeding areas.
Ooh.
So, or their spawning areas. So, yeah, this crisis absolutely has a significant impact on the fish population for sure. More largely, when we're looking at less water and when you're looking at how much waterfall is in the Colorado River Basin, we're thinking about how much snow is falling, right?
Hmm.
And if we're getting less snow, or if the snow is melting faster, that impacts all of the animals in an ecosystem where there is snow. So
Hmm.
that I don't know. I think there's a clear connection between the terrestrial ecosystems and the riparian ecosystems that are downstream. Because we're getting less snow, the terrestrial ecosystems are not doing well, and the riparian ecosystems are not doing well either.
Right. Wow. Okay, so obviously we're not the only ones that are being impacted by this, and that shouldn't really come as a shock because there are animals that live in water. Although we rely on water, it's not something that we live in, and it's our habitat. So it really isn't that shocking to hear, but it definitely is upsetting, and it's wild to think because not only is the endangered species of fish becoming potentially extinct with these issues occurring, like these bass going into parts of the Grand Canyon that they typically haven't been in before, and now they're getting to these species that they previously didn't have access to. But it also begs an issue of, okay, if we can't have fish and we aren't able to water our crops, how are we going to get food? Because everything's drying up, and there's going to be a point in time when nothing is accessible. And then what do we eat? Then at that point, we decide, okay, maybe let's just eat grass.
Yeah, I think that the farmers in the lower basin are like very seriously confronting this possibility because, again, if Lake Powell gets low enough, there's a very real possibility that the structural engineering will not allow them to actually receive their full allocation of water. If any amount of water, they might, if it gets low enough, they might literally not be able to access any of the water in Lake Powell. The Colorado River would run dry. That's like a nuclear option. It's so unlikely. It probably would not
Right.
happen, but just throwing out there that like those farmers down there are very seriously facing the possibility of not having access to their water, which is quite ironic because like I said, they're the most powerful water rights in the basin. But like
Mm-hmm.
push comes to shove, when Mother Nature doesn't give you the water, you just don't have the water, and it doesn't matter if you have a legal right to it.
Yeah, you're kind of screwed either way because it's not like it's just like, hey guys, I actually have the right to the water, so we're gonna need it to rain right now. Not
Yeah,
really how that works.
exactly.
But yeah, that's the more that I hear about it, the more interesting it is. And that's why I love doing these podcasts because I feel like I learn so much about these topics that are very conversational right now and to me are extremely interesting. And so I love hearing from people that are super passionate about whatever their expertise is in. Like, obviously, yours is water. And how did you even get to this point where you're extremely knowledgeable about all things water? And how did you get to this point?
Well, I'm a big nerd. We'll start there. Number two is I grew up in a town that has a river running through it. So rivers have just kind of like been a big part of my life. It is part of the Colorado River Basin. We're a tributary to the Colorado River. And when I was just about graduated high school, I became a raft guide. And the year I became a raft guide, there was like a big mine spill on the river that ran through my town. And it turned like bright orange. It was this whole thing. We were on like national news. And I think that was the first time I was like, whoa, I should like research what's happening to this river and like what happens with rivers and where does this water go? Like I just hadn't really thought about it. Um,
Yeah.
and then I went to college. I double majored in environmental studies and political science, and I focused everything
Hmm.
kind of on water. And while I was in college, I attended the Colorado Water Congress. And one of the things that really made me be like, oh, water is it for me, is at that event, there were like so many like bolo tie, big old boot wearing cowboys, because those are the people who have water rights. Those are the people who are involved in this. And every one of them was just talking about climate change like a fact. Like
Yeah.
they know the climate
I
is
just got
changing.
chills.
They know it is hotter and drier because like their crops are dying. They're not getting their full allocation. Like it's obvious to anybody who works in the water world. And I was like, wow, that's so cool because I had been
Hmm.
banging my head against a wall with my relatives trying to explain climate change and to meet these like conservative individuals who like clearly acknowledged it. I really wanted to invest in it. And then I also ended up becoming a raft racer. I represented the United States at the World Rafting Championships 2 years in a row. And at both of those events, the other teams just kept being like, oh my God, the Colorado River, I can't believe you live there. And I found out that rafting was born in the Colorado River Basin. It was invented
Huh.
here for the Colorado River. And I just think that's so cool. And I came back and was like, I gotta learn even more. So I founded a club that was called H2Org, and it was like dedicated to water resource issues on campus. And I was like, we
Hmm.
did some dam tours, we did some wastewater treatment tours, we did some fishing, we had like guest speakers. It was super fun. But unfortunately, I graduated in May of 2020, and I was like, oh dang. So they basically told me like, enjoy spring break, like never come back, which was just so funny.
Yeah. No.
Uh, which was a bummer because I had this club and I was doing all this stuff.
Hmm.
And so I was like, I don't want to say I was an expert, but I was definitely a big nerd and really deep into it by then. But then immediately after college, I tried to join. Colorado has something called the Colorado Water Plan, which is our plan for water for the next 50 years. Each basin has a round table that comes up with like things to contribute to the water plan. And the round table is just like a volunteer board of stakeholders. And I was
Hmm.
tapped by somebody who was leaving the board and was like, "Hey, would you want to take my spot?" So I applied. My county commissioners at the time, I'm friends with them now. We have worked through this. I
Hmm.
have no beef with them. But they were just so condescending to me. They were like, "Oh, sweetie, like you seem so passionate. There must be another way for you to be involved." And I was like, "This is literally a volunteer position. Like I'm just trying to be involved." And the day I got the rejection letter from that position is the day that I started my platform. I made a video because I was really peeved. I was pissed off. And I
Yeah.
was like, I want to talk about this issue. So I started talking about it. The first video I made went kind of viral. Once there were a lot of eyeballs on me, I definitely felt the need to make sure that I was fact checking and having credibility. And then
Yeah.
about 6 months after that, somebody was like, "Hey, did you know that you're doing like journalism?" And I was like, "What?" So I've been
Hey,
trying,
bestie.
yeah, I've been trying to like hold myself to some level of credibility. And anything I'm reporting is like something that I have learned, and there's a source to report on it. But a lot of it just came from like I took classes like water politics and policy. I took a class on water law. I took a class on the Colorado River Basin policy or politics. Like that was all a part of my education in college.
Yeah.
And now, as everything is kind of, I don't know if you curse on your platform, but if as shit is hitting the fan, that information has
Yes.
been really, really helpful for me to understand like all of these different moving parts.
Yeah. And it's amazing because you can definitely see how you relate. I was not surprised at all when you're like, yeah, I double majored in political science. Like, okay, I can totally see that for you. But it's so great because then you can weave each part into one another. And it's so mind boggling how effortlessly that happens. Of, hey, this law was created, this affects this environmental organization, and these two are directly related. And this is why it happened because this is what happened in Congress and this is what was going on and blah, 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 blah. And how effortlessly it just ties together. So although they don't seem related, they weirdly are, because like what you said at the very beginning of the episode, it oddly is intertwined in politics when it is just a natural resource, which you feel like it shouldn't be.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, 100%. And also in the basin, not only the basin, I'd say like in conservation science, the environmental community in general, we have tons of data. We have tons of scientists. The people who tend to be in that community, bless their hearts, tend to be more introverted, maybe not as online, maybe really enjoying their personal time alone in the woods, which I
Love
totally
that for them.
get. Love it for them, but unfortunately, we need storytellers. We need
Yep.
people who are willing to speak up, and we need people who are willing to break down information in a way that makes sense, in a way that the average person is going to care about. And so I'm like really glad that I found this little niche in an issue that I care a lot about.
Yeah. And while you were describing like these boards and these rooms that you're in with people with guys in bolo ties, like how many women are involved? Because what it sounded like when you were talking about the journalists that you follow, there's a lot of female voices in the realm of journalism. But how many voices, like when you walk into a room, when you are sitting on this board, how many women are there? Are there an equal representation of men and women, or is it definitely polarized, more dominated by men, or what does it look like?
This is a great question, actually. There's a very unique demographic shift happening in the water conservation community right now that used to be dominated by these folks that were like 70, 60-year-old men that you like literally people call them water buffaloes. You can find references to that like in books and stuff. Like they were
Nice.
very obstinate, difficult to work with, always wearing the bolo tie, always wearing the boots. It's also really funny when you go to like the big conference for the entire Colorado River Basin, you can tell the upper basin versus the lower basin because the upper basin is all wearing like farmer clothes and the lower basin is all wearing like suits and stuff. It's just really funny. What's happening now is young women like myself and even a little bit older, up to like 40 or so, are starting to take over. So you go to these conferences and it's literally men over the age of 50 and women under the age of 50. And
I
it's like
love
this really
that.
unique thing. And I look forward to this because the women that are taking over in leadership positions are they're doing really well. For example, the person who is the negotiator for Colorado is a woman named Becky Mitchell. Love Becky. She's a wonderful lady. She's a great leader. We recently just appointed, well, this is really cool. Colorado has something called the Colorado Water Conservation Board, which is like the entity that manages water for all of Colorado. It was created in 1937, and like just a year or two ago, they appointed the first Indigenous person. She's a Southern Ute
Oh,
tribal
wow.
member. Her name is Lorelei Cloud, and this year she was actually
Oh
elected
my
to
gosh,
be
I've
the
heard of her
chair of the
actually.
board, which is so cool. So we're seeing women and Indigenous people take over positions of leadership, and I think that's exactly what we need to get out of this crisis.
Yeah, 100% agree because having a different perspective come in and point out things that these people hadn't previously seen or are not privy to because they're just so dialed in on where they've been over the past 50 years that they've been attending these board meetings. Things have changed. And so it's good to hear that there's a shift and a wave coming of, and no pun intended with wave coming, oh, a wave coming of women that have these new ideas and these new foundations of, hey, here's what's important and here's what we need to be talking about. I love that. That's amazing. amazing.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see. And also, like, I hope that means I get to be a mentor to another generation coming after me.
Yeah, I mean, you're already mentoring me right now, and we're in the same generation, so appreciate it. And it really is valuable to hear voices like yours of we're the same age, we're relatively the same age, a year or two different, just based off your graduation year alone. I graduated in 2021. It's great to hear other people that are young caring about these things, because I went on a cruise to Antarctica and we were talking about climate change, and the other people aboard the ship were quite older than my brothers and myself. My brothers and myself, our combined age was still probably lower than the average age of the person on the ship. And it was just so frustrating to hear. They're like, why would I care about this? That's not our problem. And I'm like, what? Don't you have grandchildren? I literally heard you talking about your grandchildren's soccer game last night at dinner. Like, what do you mean it's not your problem? It's everyone's problem. So it's really refreshing to hear other people's voices and hear other people actually care about issues beyond just when's the new iPhone coming out and how many followers do you have on Instagram, which is also part of what you are able to provide in terms of a platform. But it's not just like, I'm going to post this outfit and this is what it's going to be about. It's actually value-based and purpose-based, because I feel like on both ends of the spectrum, our generation and then that generation that I went on the cruise with in Antarctica, it's like, guys, come on, let's wake up. Let's listen. Like, there's things happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will say, it is always funny talking to somebody over the age of like 35 about what I do, because I'm like, I'm an influencer. And they like look at me sideways and I'm like, no, it's not like that. It's a different thing. It's for good, I swear.
I'm actually influencing people to do things and be better and take in information about their environment and their water rights.
Absolutely. And I think there's actually a space for like literally any person that has an issue that they care about to just start talking about it online. And if you're authentic about it enough and passionate about it enough, people will listen to you. I was shocked. I did not expect to build a platform, and I'm so thankful I was able to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. And I really thank you for your time to talk with me and explain to me about what water rights are and why people should care and where you should look for information. It is so, so powerful and moving to see someone who's so passionate about something, talk about something with such fervor and have it impact other people's lives, because you may have inspired some other person to talk about water rights in their area and learn about it in their area. So I thank you for what you're doing, and it's really, really valuable, and you're doing such an amazing job. You're so easy to talk to, and I'm glad that there's someone like you that is voicing these things and talking to all the right people and making a real difference.
Oh, thank you. That is so kind of you to say. I really appreciate it. And thank you for like giving me a space to just talk about my hyperfixation. So I appreciate it.
I think everyone deserves a space, so of course.
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. And if you ever have any need from me to get an extra helping hand in your ventures going forward as a political campaigner or as someone to help clean up the rivers with you, I'm totally down. Just feel free to reach out whenever.
Thank you so much. That's so kind of you, Sarah.
Of course. Well, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Consider the Source podcast. And if you loved Teal's journey, be sure to follow her along on her social media escapades, as well as her career campaign. So thanks again to Teal for coming onto the show to talk about water rights and water activism. It was truly an amazing episode. And if you feel so inclined, please leave a comment to let us know what can be improved and what you love about the podcast. Additionally, please make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast if you want to hear more stories from amazing women doing amazing things. So again, thank you for listening to the Consider the Source podcast, and I'll see you next week. Bye.